once there's blood in the water and a shark knows what it's like to taste human flesh, the sharks keep coming back.
For decades, he's been the man in the room, there when major decisions were made.
We had to get this problem out of the way.
And in the thick of it, during one of the most tumultuous times in US history.
They were handing me their guns and saying, you need to defend your family.
In Trump's ear.
He just ripped into me and ripped into Australia.
And in Washington, as Australia's most important relationship was on the brink of collapse.
It's like a cancer on our nation, and we need to rebuild that every time.
Tonight, the former ambassador to the US, Joe Hockey, uncut, no holds barred, nothing off the table.
Did you leak the transcript? Is there a pattern here, though? Pattern of behaviour from the Prime Minister?
Revelations around Donald Trump's potential comeback, the phone call which nearly destroyed an alliance, the remarkable praise for the Labor leader, concerns of world war, and the incredible order he disobeyed.
That's extraordinary.
It is.
Did you consider it?
No.
It's the interview sure to shake Canberra and DC. It certainly rattled this veteran politician.
I can't do that.
Joe Hockey, the diplomat, the interview, Sky News.
We're talking today at a time where the world is changing. Allegiances are shifting, and you were ambassador when the US-Australian relationship almost fell apart. Is that fair?
Well, it was certainly under a lot of pressure. I mean, no one could really anticipate what was going to happen when Donald Trump became President of the United States.
Joe Hockey arrived in the United States to take Australia's most important diplomatic posting during a political earthquake.
I am officially running for President of the United States.
A billionaire real estate mogul was shaking up the 2016 presidential campaign. Candidate Donald Trump was off the wall, off the cuff, and off the scale.
We are going to build the wall. It will be a real wall. A real wall.
I could stand in the middle of Fifth Avenue and shoot somebody and I wouldn't lose any voters.
His manner, as well as his nationalistic America First policies, fissured the Republican Party base. Yet he destroyed his highly fancied rivals.
We will make America great again.
Despite winning his party's nomination, he was written off by almost every expert.
You reached out to the Trump campaign before anyone did. That paid off, but you were working against, it seemed, the Prime Minister, the Foreign Minister at the time, and the entire public service.
Yeah, they were all pretty sceptical. Firstly, you know, the reason why you appoint a senior colleague to the United States is you've got to trust their judgment on the ground. And what I say in my book is don't assume you understand the United States because we've watched all the TV and grown up with everything Americana. America is 50 different countries, and it in that, you know, divergent nation, you're going to have many different agendas. You're going to have many different attitudes towards Australia and so on. My view was I had to back my judgment. And I thought Donald Trump was going to win. And I said it, even publicly in Australia. I said there's a real chance he could win. I said privately to Malcolm Turnbull, I think he is going to win. And that was completely contrary to the view of almost all the public service here in Australia, but also a lot of former colleagues in Parliament.
How can you do your job when you don't have their trust, though?
Well, I don't know that it's so much trust. It's just, I think there is that we can all fall into the very dangerous situation of believing everything we read in the media. Now, that's of course not your show, Laura, but you know, people just start to believe groupthink, and you know, even in the embassy they did. And what I did was I said to our team, I want you to drive hundreds of miles outside of Washington, DC, and have a look at what's happening out there. I want you to go to the swing states, to the swing counties, have a look, talk to people. And when they came back, there was a complete sea change in the attitude in the embassy, because they'd gone out and they looked around Washington, DC or New York or San Francisco, wherever it might be, and they saw Hillary Clinton signs everywhere. And when they went out to where Middle America is, they discovered a whole different attitude. Every other country wrote off Donald Trump potentially winning the election. We didn't, and we won.
You didn't send one cable with your name on it when you were ambassador. Why not?
Well, that's a great question. Ambassadors are famous for writing cables that go far and wide in the public service. My view was, if I expressed deep opinions and they went widely in the public service, I might end up reading about them in the media. So I didn't sign a cable for 4 years, and deliberately. And in fact, my British counterpart made the mistake of putting into a cable what he really thought about the Trump administration, and they were leaked. Only 5 people had access to those cables back in London, and they were leaked to the media, and he lost his job, and it caused a major rift in the relationship between the UK and Donald Trump's administration.
President Trump defied orthodoxy, and he was defined by disorder.
How do you see
It was
that?
extraordinary, because none of them had ever worked in a White House, or even in most of them had never worked in any administration. So they didn't know how any administration would function, let alone a White House. Because bear in mind, the traditional Bush Republicans that had previously worked in the White House had written letters against Donald Trump's nomination for the Republican Party primary, and as a result, Trump just cut them off. So there were no Republicans there with any experience. Of course, there were no Democrats. So it was a whole new team. And the first time I walked into the White House after Donald Trump was elected, I mean, it was just extraordinary. I mean, there were just people meandering along the corridors like a county sheriff from Iowa, or there was pastors and ministers and people just wandering in and out. Security just ignored what people were doing. I mean, I expected to see pet pig run along the corridor next to the Oval Office. It was an extraordinary scene.
This tectonic shift presented a difficult landscape for diplomacy. Nothing was now certain, not even our century-old US alliance.
He's not particularly a student of history. He is someone that lives events and then shapes his own views on the events that he's lived rather than what he's learnt. And so he had no regard for any historical relationships, be it, the Brits went there and said, we have a special relationship, a term created under Winston Churchill, and Donald Trump said, I don't really care about that relationship, we saved you in World War II. Or, Germany and France, well, we had to beat you in World War II. Or France, we saved you in World War II, or et cetera, et cetera. I mean, it just goes on and on and on. And so he only had a regard for people that he'd previously dealt with in business.
Just 1 week into Trump's presidency, a major test of the strength of our ties. A terse phone call between the President and the then Prime Minister Malcolm Turnbull regarding a deal for the US to accept Australian immigrants. Trump's predecessors signed it, Trump detested it.
Malcolm Turnbull rang me and he was quite shaken, and pretty understandably, because he'd just been chewed out by the new President of the United States. And we thought we had a deal with the office, which was the office of President Obama, and yet President Trump had a different view about the deal. I mean, a deal involving refugees was anathema to Donald Trump. It really had to be resolved quickly. I was absolutely determined not to see this drag on and just create and define in Donald Trump's mind what Australia was all about. We had to reshape his understanding of Australia, but we had to get this problem out of the way.
Did you leak the transcript?
No, of course not. I didn't even have the transcript, so I don't know how I could have leaked it. But
Malcolm Turnbull thought you did.
Yeah, it was an absurd proposition, and I think it was just, a moment of emotion.
Not a lack of trust?
Well, I think Malcolm's always has failed to trust any of his colleagues over the years, and that's his call, but certainly we didn't.
Trump begrudgingly honoured the deal, but later berated the ambassador over a cable. The then UK High Commissioner, Alexander Downer, expressed concern that Trump campaign staffer George Papadopoulos may have been getting dirt on Hillary Clinton from Russia. That triggered the Russia collusion probe, which hung over Trump's presidency for years.
He took it upon himself to go and visit the American embassy.
Was that the mistake?
It wasn't a mistake. I think, again, it was the right thing to do. But what happened was that the American embassy, backed by the FBI, immediately launched an investigation into Donald Trump on the basis of that information.
Turnbull said to you, Alexander should never have gone to the Americans. That's contrary to what you think.
Yeah, look, I think I can understand Malcolm Turnbull saying that, but
why?
Because it became painful for him and it became an undercurrent in the relationship. But frankly, you've got to do your job as ambassador. Good ambassadors have courage. Ordinary ambassadors just do whatever Canberra wants them to do.
What Turnbull is suggesting, though, is that Alexander Downer should have covered it up. He should have shut up.
Well, that's for Malcolm to discuss. But from my perspective, you've got to do what's right. And frankly, if the Americans heard something about foreign interference in our elections, we'd expect them to tell us straight away.
A year after that first golf game, you were at Mar-a-Lago, and he gave you a piece of his mind, didn't he?
He did. We were meant to play Saturday morning golf, and we were meeting for breakfast at Mar-a-Lago first. And he walked into that room, and there were about 60 people having breakfast. And he stood, at Mar-a-Lago, they all stand and applaud him as he enters a room, a bit like even beyond what would happen with Queen Elizabeth. And so everyone stood and applauded, and then he sat everyone down and he said, "We have the Australian ambassador here. Oh my God, what have I done to Australia? Why would Australia start this whole thing?" He just ripped into me and ripped into Australia. But simply by me writing to say we're prepared to share that information with the Attorney General, it's certainly lowered the temperature with Donald Trump.
The hot-headed leader can turn personal gripes into major political headaches, and was threatening to do that to Australia. Australian industries were almost collateral damage in Trump's trade war with China. Hockey convinced the administration to exempt Australia from steel and aluminium tariffs. But there remained very real fears that that would be reversed on a whim. He blamed Australia for instigating the Russia probe.
That cable nearly cost us when it came to those tariffs, didn't it?
It was close. It was close. I was more concerned that Alexander Downer says he was coming on a private trip to Washington. I said, I don't think that's a good idea. If you have a bad relationship with the President of the United States, it's like a cancer. It's like a cancer on our nation, and we need to rebuild that every time.
The Trump presidency would last just one 4-year term. His widely criticised handling of the COVID-19 pandemic, mostly to blame for his election loss.
Operation Warp Speed, which was America backing the vaccines, that is why we can sit here today. Because America used all of its innovation backed by a massive amount of US money, initiated by Donald Trump. And the vaccines came writ large for the world because of what he did there. The problem was he just had no empathy with the nation that was going through terrible crises. And he just failed to understand how much Americans were hurting with COVID. And even when he got COVID and it really was very serious, a threat to the life of the President of the United States. As soon as he got a little bit better, he felt the need to get in his car, endanger his own staff, and wave to his supporters outside. And that, for me, was the moment he lost the election, when he was cavalier about something that cost so many lives.
Will he run?
Well, my instinct is that he won't, because if there's enough reason for him to be worried about winning, the worst thing in his mind he could ever be is a two-time loser. So, having said that, if the environment is such that the Democrats haven't got a credible candidate, and at the moment they haven't, assuming Joe Biden's not going to run again, and I think we all assume he's not going to run again, then who are the Democrats going to run as the candidate? And the thing is, Donald Trump controls the Republican Party. So if he wants the nomination, in the current environment, he will get it.
Coming up, staring down the Chinese Communist Party, why the Liberal stalwart admires the Labor leader and has anger at those within his own party.
Because I was stabbed in the back. There are still deep racial divisions in the United States. In truth, how can there not be? During the Black Lives Matter period and the protests, I mean, curfews were imposed in Washington, D.C., and the police would not answer 911. Friends of mine who were Democrats, when I asked them what to do if we had to call 911 in the middle of race riots, you know, they were saying, "Here, we've got a gun for you." They were handing me their guns and saying, "You need to defend your family." And I knew that was time when, that particular time, it was time to send my family back to Australia.
China's rise on the international stage and its flouting of international laws has long been a cause for concern. In his newly released book, Diplomatic, Joe Hockey reveals it was a former US president who made the most brazen request.
Barack Obama asked you and the then Prime Minister Tony Abbott to flat out stop sending our iron ore to China.
Yeah.
That's extraordinary.
It is. And my response...
Did you consider it?
No, because it was so important for the budget, but also, you know, the fact was that, you know, as I said to the Secretary of the US Treasury, are you going to buy our iron ore? Of course I won't. So, you know, it's kind of, it was, for me, it was pretty hypocritical, because the US wasn't stopping its own sales to China, but they wanted us, you know, to try and pull back, if not stop out. You know.
As Treasurer, you really pursued free trade, the TPP, the AIIB, the China FTA. Do you think you were naive to China's threats then?
No. I've been going to China since I was about 14 years of age. And I've seen the greatest transformation in the lives of the most number of people in the history of humanity. I mean, China is a remarkable story, and it's a positive story. The problem is Beijing's gone off-piste. It's focused more on preserving the power of the Communist Party than doing what's right for the future of China. And that's created massive disruption around the world. And you know, somehow I think people in Beijing have mistaken, you know, their success with the success of China.
Joe Hockey was arguably the last Australian treasurer to have a positive or any relationship with his Chinese counterpart. But tonight we can reveal relations between Canberra and Beijing were worse than reported. For more than a decade, Australian officials have been pushing back on China's coercive trade practices, standing up to the world's second biggest economy and our biggest trading partner, especially when it was pushing the price of iron ore to $30 a tonne.
China was manipulating the market. You threatened to merge BHP and Rio Tinto. Were you bluffing?
No.
You would have done that?
Yes. I looked him in the eye as he was puffing a cigarette and said, So here's the deal, you know, if iron ore stays below $40 a tonne, we'll end up with two major suppliers out of Australia, and I'll merge the two and I'll control the world price. I think it's really important that we do what we continue the path under whoever's in government. We continue the path to focus on standing up to the bully, and China is the modern bully.
Well, it's looking pretty fine.
Bullying. It's a charge that's been laid against our Prime Minister in recent weeks.
I can tell you what, he's probably one of the most unpleasant men I've ever had to sit in front of. He is a bully, he is intimidating, and that's the truth of the matter.
Members of his own party have denounced Scott Morrison's past behaviour, which they claim has been inappropriate and abusive.
There is a very appropriate saying here: the fish stinks from the head. It is his way or the highway. An autocrat, a bully who has no moral compass.
How can we ignore what she says, what Gladys Berejiklian says, what numerous other of his colleagues says? It all comes down to character. You're a guy that sits here and talks about how important someone's soul, someone's character is. Shouldn't we be examining his character too?
Well, of course, there's going to be a lot of scrutiny of character. That's not going to change.
It's not looking good.
But the challenge, the biggest change in politics that I've seen is social media. And what social media does is it gives a loud horn to the critics. The volume of the critics is far, far louder than the volume of the advocates. And of course, if people are constantly being criticised, everyone rolls out that line, where there's smoke, there's fire. I mean, that is just, in this world, it's, you know, you're condemned before you even get a trial.
Is there a pattern here though?
It's and I think it's terrible. I think it's terrible.
No, I mean a pattern of behaviour from the Prime Minister.
No, I never saw evidence of that at all. I mean, Scott Morrison, you know, from my perspective, you know, and seeing him as, you know, when he was Prime Minister and I was Ambassador, he was very honourable.
But Joe Hockey says conniving backroom behaviour is common. It ended his career and lifelong ambition to be Prime Minister.
You write in the book as well, if you would have stayed, you would have become vengeful. Why?
Well, because I was stabbed in the back.
By who?
Well, it's well documented. I mean, a number of colleagues, you know, they didn't have conviction. They didn't believe in things. They just believed in, you know, higher office, and so that's their call. You know, I've always been a conviction person, and believe that you have to have the courage to do what's right rather than what's popular. That's why I despise independents. They only go to the things that are popular. They never do things that are unpopular.
But there is love for the Labor Party leader.
I really like Anthony Albanese. He's a very decent guy. But I said to him, I can't vote for you. I'm a Liberal, right? So that's the way it is. You know,
you describe him as thoroughly decent, actually.
Yes, yeah,
you don't even come close to describing the current leadership like that.
I've known Anthony Albanese for a very long time, and he formed, you know, he came to my father's funeral. You know, he formed a relationship with my dad. That meant a lot to me. You know, he never, you know, I mean, he really never had a dad in his life. You know, and I've travelled a few journeys with him, and so, you know, you're more effusive about someone you really do know. You're
the son of a Palestinian immigrant. You're named after a Labor Prime Minister. Did you pick the wrong party?
No, I picked the right party. And that party picked me as well, because, you know, all the things that, you know, yeah. You're
thinking about your dad?
Yeah.
He's a good man.
He was, yeah.
He really shaped you, didn't he?
Yeah.
Bondi Partners?
Well, that's where, you know, my dad came here, set up a delicatessen in Bondi. And then the beach model, Australian beach model, walked in. Two countries coming together.
Do you think he'd be proud of you today?
I hope so.
Do you know it?
Oh, God. That's terrible.
I know
Oh,
it, Joe.
I can't do that. I can't. No.
Sorry.
You're right.
This veteran diplomat knows peace should not be taken for granted. Hockey believes recent events in Ukraine prove the importance of international cooperation and free trade. Nations should look outward rather than inward, and he has grave fears for the future.
The massive crisis facing the world at this very moment is not energy costs, is not even the horrible conflict in Ukraine. It is the impact of the conflict in Ukraine and the potential loss of food production out of Ukraine and Russia and the impact that is going to have in Africa and the Middle East. I mean, this is, you know, the Arab Spring came about because of food shortages in some countries. This is going to be a really serious threat to the world over the next 6 to 12 months.
Are we on the brink of some kind of worldwide conflict?
God, I hope not. I hope not. It's, you know, if people can't get access to food and if people can't get access and countries can't get access to resources, that is the precursor for war.
A gloomy outlook from a man who's seen his share of tumult. As one of our top diplomats, Joe Hockey navigated complex characters, awkward surprises and stubborn foes. Now no longer in the halls of power. He, like the rest of us, relies on our current leaders to protect an even more precarious peace.